Welcome to Innovating Clinical Trials, the podcast designed for clinical research professionals eager to deepen their understanding of clinical trials through concise, insightful segments. Join your hosts, Liam Eves and Ted Trafford, as they uncover the core issues in clinical research, reflect on the industry, and challenge conventional wisdom.
Today's guest is Jill Pellegrino. Jill is the CEO of AutoCruitment. Prior to this, she held leadership positions in CVS Health as VP, Head of Recruitment and Real-World Evidence, and also held Senior VP and General Manager positions at Accelerated Enrollment Solutions. And in today's session, we're going to explore AutoCruitment's patient recruitment process, understand the role that tech has to play in recruitment, and also find out where Jill thinks recruitment is heading over the coming years, and so much more. Jill, welcome to the podcast. I'm so pleased that you could take some time in your very busy schedule to join us. Before we start and get into the crux of the conversation, it'd be great if you can perhaps give everyone a bit of background about you and how you've arrived in your current position.
Sure, and thanks for having me today, Liam. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. So I've been in patient recruitment for about 17 years. My background's actually in mathematics. I started out as an analyst. I was first working in the mortgage industry, and there was an opportunity at a company called Accelerated, where they were looking for a predictive modeler to come in and help forecast patient recruitment funnels. So that was kind of my first intro to patient recruitment and clinical research. And I was just really pleased to be working at an organization where I can make such an impact. You know, being an analyst working in the mortgage industry, I was getting frustrated that I was doing a lot of modeling and statistics, but not really being able to apply that to real world problems. So really fell in love with clinical research and being able to contribute to it with patient recruitment. And I stayed at that organization for 14 years. And so we started out as a pure patient recruitment company, and then we were acquired by PPD. So we were part of a CRO. So I got the opportunity then to really learn more about the CROs and how they work and how patient recruitment can help them be more effective in facilitating trials. And then PPD started acquiring different site networks and formed Accelerated Enrollment Solutions. So I was on that leadership team of Accelerated Enrollment Solutions, and the last role I had there was a general manager of that business. So that included Accelerated, the patient recruitment company, but it also included 160 site global site network. So that was also a great experience to get closer to the site business and better understand how recruitment can aid sites. And then in 2021, an opportunity came up with CVS Health. So I left PPD and was working at CVS Health. I was leading two businesses there, the patient recruitment for clinical trials, as well as real world evidence. And so there I was working with the different businesses within CVS Health to lean on their data to develop patient-centered solutions for pharma. So I was there for about 3 years, and then CVS decided to exit the clinical trial business. So I helped wind that down, and then the opportunity of AutoCruitment came up. So I heard about AutoCruitment, but I didn't know too much about them. But the more I learned, the more intrigued I was, because I was really, really impressed with their track record. They were a founder-run business. They've been around for 10 years, and they've worked on many trials where they've reliably driven results for clients. And after having been in this space for so long and have, really been focused on the patient recruitment problem from many angles, I was really impressed with what AutoCruitment has done. And so I've been there now leading the organization for a year, and it's been an amazing experience.
Amazing. Yeah, no, I'd love to hear about. Can you walk us through, Jill, the patient process or the patient recruitment process at AutoCruitment?
Yeah, sure. So at AutoCruitment, we are focused on direct-to-patient solutions to be able to partner patients with clinical trials. And all the work that we do and the research that we've done, we find that only about 10% of the eligible patient population ever gets the opportunity to participate in a clinical trial. So we really focus on that other 90%. The 90% of the population that's out there that doesn't have a relationship with a clinical trial site and isn't hearing about trials as an option from their physicians. So the way that we work with that population to pair them with trials is the first step is starting with access. And we rely on digital advertising to be able to reach a really wide, large audience, to find people who will be motivated to participate in trials, interested as an option for their health, but also are qualified for the protocols. So we have a lot of experience doing this. Been doing it for about 10 years. So we're really effective at reaching a large audience. There's about 10,000 people a day that are coming to one of our landing pages looking for a clinical trial option.
Wow.
So that's the first step in reaching a large audience. But we can't just dump a large audience over to the sites. That would be a failure. So we focus a lot on facilitating that handover and making sure that those patients are highly qualified and are a good match for the studies, but also partnering with the patients and the sites to help facilitate that process and make sure they make it into the trial. So that first step is qualifying them. So we have multiple ways that we do that to pre-screen them. So the first, when they come to one of our landing pages and they click on one of our ads, we'll go through an online pre-screener where the patient is self-reporting their symptoms, their health history. But we don't just rely on that. While that's very effective at filtering out a large portion of the population, we find that you can't rely on that solely, especially when you're looking for like more complex medical criteria. So we can follow that up with a clinical phone screening where we have one of our medical staff. We work with RNs as well as our own medically trained staff to follow up those patients and do a second phone call. And then the third step that we have now, which is a new offering that we have in the US, is EMR capture intelligence, where we ask the patients for their permission to be able to retrieve their medical records. And then once they give us that HIPAA-approved consent, we can work with our partner that taps into the health information exchange to be able to collect their medical records. So that's something that's all automated. It's in our technology. It's fed up into the platform for sites. It's something that the sites are probably going to do anyway, but our process allows us to do it much faster. It's very easy. Patients don't have to remember, who their doctor was or their visits, and it makes it all seamless for the patients and the sites. And then that last step, so we do that qualification to make sure we're sending highly qualified patients to the sites. But then last, we really want to, help facilitate the handover. So we have engagement services that encompasses two different teams. We have a patient engagement team that is working with the patients, and then we have a site engagement team that's working with the sites. And they're really focused on helping the patients make it into the sites, helping the sites with whatever services they need, scheduling those patients, following up with them, and then, really being like a customer service support arm for the patients, answering all their questions and helping them get comfortable with clinical trials.
That's amazing. How do you think about it, Jill, from a mathematical perspective when you're looking at it? Because the process is a lot more complicated than a lot of people think, right? And there's all these drop-off points throughout the process where you will inevitably lose patients. How do you think about that from a management perspective? And do your tools and things give that visibility so you understand exactly where patients are throughout? And how do you intercept that and course correct as you go?
Having effective technology tools to track and manage that whole process is an absolute must. I'm actually kind of blown away that it's 2025 now, and there's still a lot of recruitment companies that don't have robust technology platforms to track patient recruitment funnels. So we rely very heavily on it. We have a platform that tracks all the steps along the way from the first step when a patient sees one of our ads to all of those pre-screening steps. We're tracking all of the questions and answers to understand where patients are falling out. And then we're tracking what happens to the patients after we send them to the sites. Are they being seen? Are they being called? Are they being screened? So it's pretty detailed, and we rely really heavily on it because, this is a clinical trial enrollment. Nothing ever goes as planned.
Yeah.
So it's really, really important to be able to identify deviations or issues fast and be able to mitigate. So we rely on it and feel that it's a critical aspect of us being successful and being able to deliver patients to trials. And it's an area that we're continuing to invest in because there's so many opportunities to really optimize that patient recruitment funnel and identify those areas of patient fallout to help make it more efficient.
No, I think it's one of those things that are absolutely critical, because without that information, you obviously can't improve the process. But it also helps, I've found, with conversations with sponsors, when you see particular blocks within that process, to be able to have a much more effective conversation and productive, shall we say, conversation with sponsors to help educate around why maybe, the enrollment timelines are not being hit and so on and so forth. So having that data is absolutely critical. Are you seeing particular areas of the process, and from your experience just overall, are there areas that you focus on more than others because they're notoriously difficult or problematic when it comes to this enrollment process?
Yeah, I think there's two areas that we're really, really focused on most of the time. The one is how the sites are performing with the outside patients.
Yeah.
And this is an area where, to your point, it's really, the technology is a great lever and a great tool to have real effective conversations with the customer. This is a real key area for this because, the customer is trying to manage the sites and they're managing so many different expectations from those sites. Their CRO is managing the sites. So it's a key area where we spend a lot of time with them and helping them understand exactly what's happening at each site, what they're doing with the patients, so that as we're all together trying to work with those sites effectively, we're syncing up communications and we're sharing information about what we're seeing or what some of the challenges are that the sites have.
Yeah.
And sometimes there are insights that we see on our end that really helps the customer understand some challenges that may be impacting overall enrollment.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, we know sites are working on a lot of different trials at once. There's a lot of competing trials. So, we can see if a site is taking a referral that was intended for a certain study and putting it in another study.
Yeah.
So sometimes that information is just really helpful to help the customer understand what's happening with their trial. So that's one area of focus. The other area of focus, and this is more of an internal thing that AutoCruitment focuses on, is the top of the funnel performance and the success of the different advertising strategies that we're deploying. So as I shared, we focus on digital advertising to reach a large audience, and there's many, many different ways that you can do that, many different platforms that you can do that, and all of them have different, performance rates. There's also many different ways you can talk to the patients and different messages that you can use and different themes. So that's an area that, we're monitoring and tracking almost hourly.
Yeah.
To really optimize. And we find that, for advertising to be successful, it's a lot of test and learn. So that's something that our team really obsesses over every single day to make sure that we're optimizing the ROI and the spend when we're placing those ads.
So do sponsors understand, because obviously back in the day, it was a case of we produced material that was, hard copies, posters and things like that to put into, to attract attention from potential patients. Are sponsors aware of the dynamic nature that we can, recruit for patients now? And are they happy to let you guys or other recruitment companies test and learn over a period of time?
Yeah, I think so. Having been in this space for a really long time, I'm very encouraged by the fact that digital advertising has become more a norm for trials. So I see more and more that sponsors are planning to have a budget for patient recruitment included in their studies. And a lot of time, digital advertising or a social media campaign is absolutely part of that. So it is becoming more normal. But I would say that there's still a big learning curve for sponsors to understand how to see the best results through those advertising campaigns. There's a lot of companies in this space that are placing ads on social media and Facebook in particular, but it's not as simple as just creating an ad with the customer, sending therapy, and placing it on the platform. It does take a lot of testing and learning to best understand what's going to work and what's going to be most effective to reach particular audiences. And I think a lot of people are surprised at how much testing and learning it takes. And I think that's one of the reasons why AutoCruitment has been effective at it, because I think this is an area where experience actually matters. Because we've done so many trials, we've done 700 studies in the past 10 years. We have so much data already from past studies that help us understand, exactly what images and what colors and what messaging and what tone to take so that's going to be the most effective. So we have, the history is really important, but the flexibility to change is really important too, because depending on what's happening on those platforms day to day and month to month, the response rate you're going to get is going to vary. So you have to constantly evolve it.
Yeah, I really like the approach and have obviously digital has been around for quite some time now, but I think that the ability to get the insights and have it much more dynamic, is more dynamically managed, is absolutely critical, because to be able to feed back, I think it's a massive value to organizations where you can go back and you can feed back and say, okay, we've run this particular campaign for 5 days now. We're seeing these trends at these times. We're going to tweak it, to optimize and so on and so forth. I think that's a wonderful thing for just optimizing the spend. Now, in terms of that's at the top of the funnel where you're able to get quite, analytical, shall we say, how are you able to apply that same analytics to something like the pre-screening, where there's a level of motivation and interest from patients, right? When they see an advert, it's, potentially spur of the moment. I'm interested in this. They go through, they'll do the pre-screening. And then you often find, as we all know, that motivation can, for particular conditions, can wax and wane. And therefore you can get quite a large drop off between that initial expression of interest and then once they've completed their pre-screening. How do you go about managing for something like that?
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. Sometimes there's a quick reaction with patients clicking on they're interested, but that may not be fully indicative of their real motivation. As they have time to think about it and have to show up for an appointment. So the pre-screening services that I talked about, where we have that secondary screening with the clinical phone screen, part of that is to be able to do a more in-depth review to see if they're qualified clinically. But that phone screening is also really essential in confirming interest. And it really helps weed out a lot of the patients that may not show up for the appointments or may not be interested in it. But it also helps give them more information and answer any questions they have. Because sometimes, like if a patient just responds to an online ad and then they're contacted by the site to schedule an appointment, if they don't have any information there, they're not really going to be motivated to show up for that appointment. So that step has been really essential. And we've seen that we've been able to reduce that population more so when you don't have that extra step to touch point. And it's something that we're offering more and more on studies because, one of our primary goals is to offload the burden from the sites as much as possible. And sites enjoy working with AutoCruitment more if we can, the more qualified and interested patients we send them, the more they're going to work with us.
Absolutely. And I also like that process point that you mentioned in terms of the call and things, because I think that trust is a massive factor, right, in an individual's decision-making process. Do they trust these individuals that are potentially, going to give these test drugs on me? I think that process point really helps to build that trust.
Absolutely.
Because the last thing you want, as you say, is and I understand it from a site perspective, these sites have been so used to getting just these cold leads that come through, and in the hope that they have to either contact them, which, for a busy site is difficult as it is to process their own patients sometimes, but then to actually try and build the trust up when they don't know this patient is the first point of contact.
Yeah, absolutely. Some sites are really, really good at it, and some sites just, unfortunately, just don't have the time for it. We do a lot of work in pediatrics, and we find that it's even more critical in some of those studies where the parents are, they're even calling us after they've seen the site. So we find that service and being available and being able to help coordinate, all the communications and the facilitations with the patients is really important.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's definitely the way the industry as a whole seems to be moving, that more concierge type service in which that we recognize that these individuals are not just numbers, they are, patients or caregivers in your example there, and that actually we need to build relationships as much as we do anything with these individuals to build then that trust. Where do you think, we often hear that the biggest problem for pharma and biotech that they face is poor recruitment. Why do you think the industry as a whole performs so poorly?
I think it's the industry still primarily relies on sites to find patients. And a lot of the solutions and the innovation and the strategies to try to improve recruitment is centered around how do you make sites more effective at recruiting. But at the end of the day, there's only a very small percentage of physicians that participate in research. So they're all working on way too many trials or under-resourced. They can't facilitate all those trials. But also because only a small percentage work in research, they only have access to a very small percentage of the eligible population. So, as I shared, some of the statistics that we've seen is that only 10% of patients ever hear about an opportunity because only 10% have a relationship with one of the physicians that could be participating in research. So if the industry is constantly focused on a very limited, finite population, and I feel strongly, and we've seen this at AutoCruitment, that if you really want to drive different results, you have to focus on that other 90%. And a lot of the campaigns that we work on, on average, we're doubling the enrollment rates where we're sending about 50% of the patients. And it's not uncommon for us to be sending about 60 to 70% of the patients for some of the campaigns that we work on.
Yeah. I my rule of thumb has always been you'll depending on the type of site, but you will always, the rule of thumb is that you'll get around 50% of your patients from site and about 50% ultimately from outside. And I think that I think that part of that is, if we were to dissect the funnels and look at a funnel for the site and then a funnel for the outside, the different problem sets, right? Because you'll have for the site is that it's probably, as you mentioned, about competing resource, lack of time. They'll probably process a lot smaller volume of patients, but because they've got those relationships, that they'll get a slightly larger conversion. Where recruiting for outside, you've got to go larger because you don't necessarily have those relationships. But I love how you're trying to join the process up, so it's not actually, I would almost argue that you guys are far more than a recruitment company. I think that you're more of an enrollment company, right? Where you're actually looking at the entire process rather than just accessing patients. And I do think my view is that I think when we use the word recruitment, in my mind at least, it sort of signals more around the marketing aspects than it does around this very complex process that requires a hell of a lot of oversight and management.
Right. Yeah. We have that conversation internally often, whether we're recruitment or enrollment.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're absolutely right that there's a differentiation that AutoCruitment has in versus some of the other companies out there that would be included in the same category as us. We always like to emphasize that we are not just focused on that top of the funnel, but that we have the expertise and the understanding about how to make sure these people actually turn into patients for the trial. I don't know if I have a strong opinion about whether or not we use the word enrollment or recruitment, but we absolutely lean on that messaging and that value proposition because we think that's super critical to be successful.
Absolutely. I agree completely. Where do you see the recruitment, the enrollment space evolving over the coming years?
Yeah, I think and I'm a big proponent of this, but I think there's absolutely going to continue to be a shift towards more patient-centered solutions. Um, I'm encouraged that the industry is focusing and emphasizing a lot on patient centricity. But I do think there's a lot more work that needs to be done there, but we have to move in that direction. I don't really think we have any other choice but to really focus and shift more towards direct to patient solutions. It's a trend that goes hand in hand in what we're seeing in healthcare in general, where patients more and more are taken into their own hands, their own healthcare decisions. They're not relying on their physicians to really tell them exactly what to do next. They're online, they're searching their own solutions, they're looking up different treatment options. And we see through AutoCruitment that patients are very interested and intrigued by clinical trials as an option for their healthcare. So I think that's really where we're going to have to move, because we're going to be forced to, because that's, really where the patient behavior is. But I think it's also really critical to help advance medical science. One of the things that I think is a real shame is that, there's been so many advancements in AI and technology, and we can't really take advantage of that with healthcare, because most health data is in silos because of data privacy and HIPAA. So the only party that really has the power to open up that data and to contribute to research is the patients.
But I think you raise a really interesting point, which is around more about human behavior than it is around AI, in which that the expectations, we're seeing it all the time with things like customer, service, or personalized experiences and things like that, is that customer, your feed on Instagram or YouTube or whatever it may be, it's personalized to you. And I think that as a species, we're getting more, that's becoming more and more important and more of the standard of how we operate.
Absolutely.
So I think there's something very powerful about looking into the collective human psyche to try and uncover some of these major trends that can help, for sure.
Yeah.
What is there any important truth in the industry that very few people agree with you on?
I think, like, as I shared, I'm encouraged that the industry is thinking more about patient-centric solutions. I'm encouraged that patient recruitment or patient enrollment through digital advertising is becoming more of a norm. But I think to really change clinical trial enrollment and to be more successful, you have to fundamentally change the way trials are budgeted and planned from a feasibility perspective, as opposed to doing everything through a site lens, where you're spending a lot of time with your teams and your CRO to estimate how many sites you need, what is our enrollment rate going to be, how many countries do you have to be in, and then modeling the whole trial around that. You have to flip it upside down. And if we know that patients are looking for clinical trials as one of their healthcare options, they're taking control of their healthcare decisions. And we know there's a large population out there that need access to clinical trials to do that. Like, you flip it upside down and you design the trial around patients first. Where are the patients? How many patients you can get? And then maybe you can design the trials a lot more efficiently. If you're getting 50% of the patients from outside the sites, you don't need all the sites.
Yeah. Cool. Jill, is there anything that you think I should have asked you that I haven't?
Yeah, I think, this has been a really, really good discussion. And I could see you share a lot of my views around what the opportunities to really improve trial enrollment by engaging patients directly and partnering with sites to help with that process. One of the things, I'll emphasize here is that, I shared that I've been really impressed with the results that AutoCruitment's been able to drive. We've been doing this for 10 years. We've done it across 120 conditions, and we've done it in 37 countries. And to that extent, we've randomized over 13,000 patients in doing that. So this is something that we obsess over every single day at AutoCruitment. Our mission is to really pair patients with clinical trials. So we know we can drive meaningful results for our clients, and we really love the opportunity to discuss that with anyone who's running a trial to see where we can help.
Amazing. And Jill, where can people reach out and hear more, get in touch?
Sure. Anybody can reach out to me on LinkedIn, or you can go to AutoCruitment.com, and there's a form there to reach out to us.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. I know how busy you are, so really appreciate this, Jill. It's been brilliant. Loved it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.